Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here and 4Ks, and this video will conclude my my Criterion Collection Barnes & Noble sale haul for summer of 2024. So I did a short first video, and here's the rest of it. This is everything that I've gotten, and it's some good stuff. A lot of it is new stuff that's just come out this month. In fact, I think all of it. But there's a lot of good stuff coming out, this month and later this year through Criterion. They're having a really good year. I've been pretty impressed. But I'll start with Perfect Days, which is one of my favorite movies of the year. I don't know whether to count it as, I guess it's technically 2023, but I kind of think of it as a 2024 movie because it premiered on digital and had its widest access then, but it's always a question of when did this come out? But regardless, it is one of the new films from Wim Wenders, and it is just wonderful. It is a movie that I found so moving and so just beautiful to watch. Just for those that don't know, the basic idea of the story is that Koji Akushu plays a character named Hirayama, and he is living in Tokyo, and he is a guy that cleans public toilets. But they're not just regular public toilets, although maybe he does those too. But part of what he's cleaning is these really beautifully redesigned toilets that's part of this whole program. In fact, I'll just mention that it's the Tokyo Toilet Project, which I guess there was a project to renovate 17 public toilets in Tokyo, and they had 16 world-renowned architects and designers participate in sort of creating these new toilets, and they're beautiful. All of them have sort of a different look, but they're really pretty. So it's not like he's just running around cleaning regular old toilets. Another part of it is that. And what's interesting is that is part of the impetus for the movie, is that Wim Wenders, I'm going to get this screwed up, but I think he was sort of invited to do a documentary about this project, and he had 16 days to do it, and he was excited about that prospect, but then he started to think about it, and he realized in 16 days I could do something so much more interesting, and he started to work on the idea of a narrative that he could shoot in 16 days based around this character, and he developed the character with his actor, and some other folks collaborated, and they were sort of able to come up with this character. But Koji Akusho really was part of the process, and he, as Wim describes it in the interview on this disc, he sort of became this guy. And so Wim was very happy with the fact that this film was sort of the closest he came to having documentary and narrative almost perfectly in sync. They're both, it's equal parts, you know what I mean? Because it's almost like a silent movie, because the main character, Hirayama, doesn't speak much. In fact, I want to say he doesn't speak for the first half an hour of the movie, and when he does speak, it's very little. So we're just really watching him in his daily routine. He has a very small, I guess, an apartment with a hot plate and a bathroom, and he has his books and his audio cassettes. That's a big part of the movie. One of the things I love about Wim Wenders is his incorporation of American music and music in general into his films. And the soundtrack for this movie is really good because most of it sort of comes from these old audio cassettes that the main character has in his little van. And so he'll play things like Pale Blue Eyes by Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding, Redondo Beach by Patti Smith, Walking Through Sleepy City by the Rolling Stones, also House of the Rising Sun and some other songs. And it is just delightful to watch him, driving to work, listening to his music. His life is very simple. He's very happy. He has a film camera, a 35 millimeter camera that he takes photos with. I want to say they're black and white, of like trees and just, nature stuff. And he just seems very contented with his life. And so the main part of the first section of the movie is just following him around, observing him. And Wim also says in the interview something about this being like a post-pandemic movie and how the pandemic in some circles, could have been a full reset for people. And, we could have come out of it and been thinking more about the common good as opposed to what is best for us. And he found, and I think rightfully, that didn't really happen, and that the pandemic actually seemed to make people more selfish. And that's not wholly true across the board, but it does seem to be the case more than not. But what he did find is that in Tokyo, that it was different, and that this whole project, this public toilet project, and just the public parks, and they just have a sense there of community and sort of making the betterment of the community is better for everybody. And, it just seems to be a different mentality, and he was really taken with that. And I think that's part of the reason he wanted to make the movie. And yeah, I was just blown away. So that first section is just watching him, and then his niece shows up, this young girl, and she's got her own music or her own ideas, and she's following him around, and so we start to get inklings of his life before he was doing what he does now. And I kind of love that we don't get a full explanation, although Wim does give a full biography of him in the interview. He wrote a biography about the character as he saw it, and I won't go into that because I'd rather, if you haven't seen the movie, you figure it out for yourself. But the niece enters in, and then we see that some other family relations that enter in, and some indications again of this life that he had before that was very different. But Wim also talks about the idea that I think the pandemic made a lot of people sort of reevaluate their lives, and how a lot of people would prefer to live simpler lives and not be controlled by, their gadgets, as Wim says, or, just be pushed around by the job and things like that. And so it does have that appeal now. I think that's part of the reason it struck such a chord and why it's such an emotionally connective movie. It has a beautiful last shot with a great song used, and I won't talk about that, but it definitely brought me basically to tears watching it. And it's not as simple as it might seem, because it's a very complex emotional thing that's happening. But I just was blown away by this film, and I absolutely loved it. And so I had to get this 4K, and this, of course, has the 4K and the Blu-ray. And this is a 4K digital master approved by Wim Wenders. So it has the 4K and the Blu-ray. We have an essay by Bilga Airi as well. A big fan of Bilga. He's a great critic and a great champion of good films. I'm just going to read the very beginning of this. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. The city and the trees. These are the first two things we see in Wim Wenders' Perfect Days. A wide shot of Tokyo at dawn, an angle looking up at a leafy canopy against dark blue sky. The former feels like an establishing shot, the latter like a mental image fitting since we next see the protagonist, Hirayama, opening his eyes in his modest home, awakened by the sounds of a solitary street sweeper outside. Perfect Days lives in essence between these two tableaus. It's a city symphony about a man who appreciates the patches of nature and light he can find in his concrete world, and it's a film about how everyday existence drifts into our dream lives. Perfect Days also happens to be a movie about bathrooms. Its impetus was an invitation that Wim Wenders received in 2022 to visit Tokyo Toilet, a collaborative project to build 17 unique high-tech public bathrooms, each conceived by an acclaimed architect, artist, or designer in the ward of Shibuya. The endeavor's original aim, because of COVID-19 pandemic, ended up being delayed until the following year. Koji Yanai with founder Koji Yanai, after being tasked by Tokyo Toilet founder Koji Yanai with developing a new way to showcase the bathrooms, Takuma Takasaki, a writer, producer, and award-winning advertising creative director who shares credit with Wenders on Perfect Days' script, reached out to see if the director might be interested in making a series of short documentaries about them. And then it goes into talking about how he transitioned into a narrative idea and more. But yeah, it's just a beautiful thing when a film can sort of organically grow out of one thing and become something else. And it's just an incredible characterization by Koji Yakusho. You know, I was but would have been down for him to win an Academy Award for it. And apparently Wim said that he got so into character at a certain point that the movie more or less became a documentary, and the equipment they had was that of a documentary film crew, more or less. So it is a narrative feature, but it feels like a documentary, and I'm a big documentary guy, so naturally I'm drawn to docu-narrative films. Yeah, I just love it, and I'm so glad it's in the collection now. Again, you know, I've got the essay, you've got some supplements here I'm going to talk about. We have recorded in March 2024 an interview with Wim Wenders discussing the movie, and I sort of touched on some of the things he says in it. One thing he mentions at the beginning is his relationship with Japan and with the filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu, who I'm also a gigantic fan of. And I can see an influence on a lot of Wenders' work. And Wenders himself says that when I guess he was told by a friend he knew that was programming in New York City about Wenders and told him to go see Tokyo Story, and Wim said he saw it and he stayed for all 3 showings, and it changed his life and changed his whole perspective on what movies could do. And I do think Ozu is that kind of filmmaker. If you haven't seen his films, they're really mesmerizing, and they're very simple. They can be dialogue heavy in some spots and observational in others, and he has a certain style of where he wants to put the camera, so it always stays at a certain level. It's kind of like Howard Hawks. Like Howard Hawks most of the time had a specific kind of basic shot that he would use, and not a lot of close-ups and things like that. So anyway, Wenders is a little different. He's melding other things, but I do see the Ozu influence, and I love that. So that's a great interview with him, about 25 and a half minutes. Then we have a Koji Yakusho interview, subtitled, recorded in 2023, and he discusses his process of helping develop the character and stuff, and very cool stuff. Koji Yanai, producer of the Tokyo Toilet Project, does an interview here that's 9.5 minutes long, where he talks about conceiving the project and how maintenance and keeping the toilets clean was like a natural part of that process, something that he thought about from the beginning. And so, of course, it's cool that this character was developed out of this. And anyway, I love this movie. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it, it's truly a real special movie, and one that I do recommend picking up on 4K. So, okay, what else did I get? I'll go a little quicker. I got Risky Business, 1983. This one directed by Paul Brickman, who I want to listen to the commentary and get a little more of a sense of, you know, what happened with Paul Brickman, because I really like this film. He also did a film called Men Don't Leave, and then he did like one other movie. And I feel like I heard the story at one point about why he stopped making films, or why he wasn't making movies after this. But this movie, for like an 80s teen film, deserves a much higher profile than it has. And, you know, obviously it's known because it's an early role for Tom Cruise, and he's great. He's very charismatic, and he's very funny and goofy and awkward in this movie. And for those that don't know, it's basically about, he plays Joel Goodson, who's like a college-bound 17-year-old, very responsible guy with well-to-do parents. His dad drives a Porsche, which is definitely a plot point. And his parents go away and leave him alone in the wealthy Chicago suburbs. And he and his friends just start messing around. First with the Porsche, then his buddy Miles, played wonderfully by Curtis Armstrong in one of his early sort of sidekick roles. Like he would go on to do that in Better Off Dead and some other films. And I think he is just fantastic in this. Incredibly funny. He has a perfect cadence for this character. I just love him in this, and this is one of the first examples of this kind of character. And he's super funny, steals almost every scene he's in. Also features a young Bronson Pinchot as another one of his friends that sort of is rooting on some of the misbehaving. Basically, Curtis Armstrong starts to talk to him about, hiring some kind of sex worker to come to his house because they're all trying to get laid and they're all thinking about it. And he's like, you should just do this. And so he calls one for Joel, and the person comes. It ends up not being the kind of thing he's looking for, but the sex worker gives a number to this woman, Lana, and that's Rebecca De Mornay. And so eventually Joel calls that number. Lana comes over. They get together, and things get complicated because she's trying to leave her pimp, and he ends up getting caught up in that, and it's this whole thing. But it's a really neat movie because it features a lot of dream sequences. In fact, it opens with a dream sequence, and it has an incredible Tangerine Dream score that adds to that dreaminess. But it's very clever. It's well written. The characters are just really great, and it's funny. It's dramatic. It has moments of tension. It's just a step up. It's a level above. And it's most known, I think, for that scene where Tom Cruise comes out in his underwear dancing to Old Time Rock and Roll by Bob Seger. That's the cover here. But there's so much more to it than that. And I just think it's such a great 80s teen movie that really rises above and needs a higher profile. So this, I think, will help. And the 4K looks very good. The grain detail is really nice on it. It has some nice features as well, including this is the director's cut, by the way, and the original theatrical release, supervised by director Paul Brickman and producer John Avnet. 4K, this has a 4K disc presented in Dolby Vision HDR and one Blu-ray with features. Audio commentary on the original theatrical release by Brickman, Avnet, and actor Tom Cruise. I think that's an older track. It has new interviews with Avnet and casting director Nancy Klopper, new conversation between editor Richard Chu, who I believe cut Star Wars, if I'm remembering correctly, and film historian Bobby Osteen. That reminds me, in the Perfect Days disc, I forgot to mention it, one of the extras is this short, Somebody Comes Into the Light, a short by Wenders with a new introduction by him, which I didn't get a chance to watch yet, but I definitely want to check it out. It's about a 9-minute short. So Risky Business includes The Dream Is Always the Same, the story of Risky Business, and that's a program featuring interviews with Brickman, Avnet, cast members, and others. It has screen tests for Cruise and actor Rebecca De Mornay, plus an essay by film curator and critic Dave Kerr. So really nice release of an 80s teen movie that needs to be more classic than it is. And I feel like it was kind of at a time, but I feel like it's dropped away a little bit from the conversation. It needs to come back. So that's great. Then I got Le Samurai. Of course, this one from the great Jean-Pierre Melville. The letterbox summary is as follows. After carrying out a flawlessly planned hit, Jeff Costello, that's Alan Delon, a contract killer with samurai instincts, finds himself caught between a persistent police investigator, a ruthless employer, and not even his armor of a fedora and trench coat can protect him. Not a lot else needs to be said. Has one of the great opening shots of a movie where you see a dark room and slowly realize that he is in the room. Just beautiful. And this 4K is, I've heard very, very good. I haven't had a chance to check it out. I still have the old Blu-ray. I think the features are the same, but I'm going to just compare as we go. So, new 4K restoration, 4K disc presented in HDR and one Blu-ray, of course. Interviews with Melville and actors Alan Delon, Francois Perrier, Natalie Delon and Kathy Rosier. That was on the original Blu-ray, I believe. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Interviews with Rue Noguera, editor of Melville on Melville, and Jeanette Vicendo, author of Jean-Pierre Melville, An American in Paris. Yep, that's on the Blu-ray. Melville Delon, Donner, a Nuit, 2011, a short documentary exploring the friendship between the director and the actor and their iconic collaboration on The Samurai. That is also on the Blu-ray, plus an essay by film scholar David Thompson and appreciation by filmmaker John Woo, and excerpts from Melville on Melville, all here. So if you have the Blu-ray, you're getting all the supplements. Now, you don't have that 4K, obviously, and this is a movie that, obviously, it's a visual film. It's a movie that looks great, so that's part of the reason I felt the need to upgrade to 4K. I won't be disappointed with that. Next up, we have Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Now, this is a 4K and a Blu-ray as well, and this is a neat one because basically this is what we call, in the nerdy way, a leapfrog release, in that it did not have a Blu-ray release, and now it has a Blu-ray and a 4K release. It went up above and beyond. It is, of course, directed by the great Sam Peckinpah from 1973. And it is Best of Enemies, Deadliest of Friends. Pat Garrett is hired as a lawman on behalf of a group of wealthy New Mexico cattle barons to bring down his old friend Billy the Kid. So James Coburn is Pat Garrett. Chris Christopherson is Billy the Kid. This cast is incredible. It includes Richard Jekyll, Chill Wills, Barry Sullivan, Jason Robards, Bob Dylan. Yes, that Bob Dylan. R.G. Armstrong, Matt Clark, Rita Coolidge, L.Q. Jones, Jack Elam, Slim Pickens, Charles Martin Smith, Harry Dean Stanton. It just goes on and on. It's an incredible cast. And one of Peckinpah's more beloved films. It's been a minute since I've seen this one. The website for Criterion says Sam Peckinpah's cycle of genre-redefining westerns came to a close with this blood and dust-caked elegy for the American West, which marries his renegade style with a fatalistic sense of finality. As newly minted lawman Pat Garrett, James Coburn stalks the outlaw Billy the Kid, Chris Christopherson. Across the plains, their old friendship is twisted into rivalry, and mythic ideas of freedom come up against an emerging ruling class order, all to the strains of a haunting soundtrack by Bob Dylan, who also appears as the mercurial Elias. Yeah, Bob Dylan does the soundtrack, which is great. I think Wes Anderson used one of the tracks for Royal Tenenbaums, if I recall. Presented here for the first time in 3 separate versions, stands as perhaps the maverick auteur's richest, most mature work, a world-weary ballad that bears the solemn weight of history passing into legend. Peckinpah, obviously one of the great Western directors, and certainly a guy who was observing the end of the West, and would do things like Ride the High Country, which I love, and The Ballad of Cable Hogue, which I also love, and even Junior Bonner, which are all kind of observing an end of the Western frontier as we know it in one way or another. And I feel like he approaches that idea, and obviously the Wild Bunch, I shouldn't leave that one off. He approaches that idea, in this really sort of melancholy way, but also I just love the way he comes at it. I just love his sort of process for thinking about these Westerns, and they're postmodern in a certain way, but also very traditional in some other way. I don't know. He's a real incredible filmmaker, and so it's great to have this on 4K. I haven't had a chance to check this one out yet. This has 2 4K UHD discs and 2 Blu-rays, so a little bit more expensive. New 4K digital restoration of the 50th anniversary release, supervised by editors Paul Sador and Roger Spottiswoode. New 4K restoration of the original theatrical release. Audio commentary for the 50th anniversary release featuring Sador, Spottiswoode, and critic Michael Sragow. The 2 4K UHD discs of the films presented in Dolby Vision HDR, and 2 Blu-rays with films and special features. So, so you have multiple versions of the film. You have Dylan in Durango, a new interview with author Clinton Halen about the film's soundtrack. Passion and Poetry, Peckinpah's Last Western, a new documentary by Mike Siegel about the making of the film, archival interview with James Coburn, trailers and TV spots, essay by author Steve Erickson. Definitely one of the releases of the year, potentially really exciting to have this finally on Blu-ray. And lastly, this one sort of goes with the stuff that Flickr Alley has been doing with their Argentinian and Spanish noir films. This is called Victims of Sin. It is a film from, the Peckinpah film is from 1973. Victims of Sin is from 1951. And Criterion's website summarizes thus: a treasure of Mexico's cinematic golden age, this deliriously plotted blend of gritty crime film, heart-tugging maternal melodrama, and mambo musical is a dazzling showcase for iconic star Ninon Sevilla. She brings fierce charisma and fiery strength to her role as a rumbera, a female nightclub dancer who gives up everything to raise an abandoned boy whom she must protect from his ruthless gangster father. Directed at a dizzying pace by filmmaking titan Emilio Fernandez and shot in stylish chiaroscuro by renowned cinematographer Gabriel Figueroa. Amid smoky dance halls and atmospherically seedy underworld haunts, Victim of Sin is a ferociously entertaining female-powered noir pulsing with the intoxicating rhythms of some of Latin America's most legendary musical stars. So it sounds like a great mix of noir, melodrama, music, and one that I just was really intrigued by. I saw some people picking this up, and I was like, oh, what's that one? I got to check that out. New 4K digital restoration, new interview with filmmaker and archivist Vivian Garcia Besney, new interview with cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto on the work of Gabriel Figueroa, archival documentary on Cinema de Rumberas featuring interviews with actor Ninon Sevilla, and an essay by film scholar Jacqueline Avila. So that is the stuff that I picked up through the Criterion sale. Definitely let me know some other stuff that you've picked up, and I hope you've enjoyed this sale. It feels like it's been a big one. I feel like I've seen more interest in these videos and in the sale itself than I have in a few years, although it's always exciting and people always get really worked up about this sale, but this one seems to have made really an impact on people, so that's very cool to me. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.